Yeah, we had a mild December in Wisconsin. I guess nature didn't want to wait until summer to make us pay for it.
Well, here's to another year, I guess. So, January is the start of a new year, so I figured that to start the year off right, I can make a list about opening levels in video games. Yeah, I did this list once before in 2012, but I've played a lot more games since then. Not to mention that I've developed significantly as a video maker, so that rusty old relic is pretty much obsolete. The opening level of a game is important, since if you start off your game on the wrong foot, you're gonna have a hard time keeping your players engaged. The first level of a game has the task of introducing the player to the game and its rules and world. So here are 10 levels that I feel do a great job of giving players a feel for the game ahead. Okay, let's bring the old up to date with the new. It's game time! What better place to start this list than with a timeless classic to help lay the foundation for the platforming genre? Not to mention a game that Nintendo is still making money off of more than 30 years later. The original Super Mario Bros. Took the baton from Rob's hand after the old robot helped get the NES onto store shelves in the West, and the plumber took off running and never looked back. And as old as this game is, World 1 still holds up as a great way to introduce players to this old gem. The old-school pixel graphics and iconic theme are an 8-bit cover for a living manual's worth of information, conveyed to the player through action. You learn from doing here, from stomping on the first Goomba, to punching blocks to find power-ups, some of which are hidden 1-ups, to finding those pipes that lead to underground bonus rooms, and how to use a Koopa shell to knock over lines of enemies. It's actually pleasantly surprising how well this level holds up as a template for good level design, even after all these years.
I may be old, but I can still pull it off.
During the 5th console generation, I missed out on the PlayStation 1. Granted, back then I was the kind of fanboy who'd barely give anything outside of Nintendo a second look, which regrettably means I missed out on the original Crash Bandicoot trilogy when the games were first released. However, that eventually changed thanks in large part to the N. Sane trilogy, a decision which I do not regret in the slightest, since these remakes were great. But man, the first game could get merciless. Of course, this was due to the level design more than anything else, since the game's first level, Insanity Beach, does a good job of letting you get used to how the game works. Similar to World 1, the level teaches you all you need to know, serving as a tutorial in motion. Enemies are simple to bounce on and spin into, you get a feel for destroying crates and collecting Wumpa Fruit, you see that levels can have multiple paths, and that sometimes attacking certain metal crates cause more crates to appear. You even learn how the Aku Aku masks and invincibility work. What puts this above World 1 is the aesthetic, even with the PS1 original showing how far graphics had come by that time. Basically, Insanity Beach is for 3D platforming what World 1 was for 2D, and for that, it does its job admirably well. Okay, nowadays, Konami is pretty much the equivalent of an oppressive authoritarian regime run by the devil. But I remember the days when they were loved instead of universally despised. Around the time of games like Super Castlevania IV, which I still consider to be the definitive stage-based Castlevania game. And boy did they know how to start a game off right back in the day. You start off with an ominous music track, and a skull in the background. Then you jump to the drawbridge and it starts to close slowly with a foreboding creaking. Then you enter the courtyard, the fence comes up, and greatness. Glorious medieval aesthetic and the greatest theme in the franchise aside, this first stage does a great job of letting you get the hang of what Simon can do. Whipping in any direction, trying out the various sub-weapons, the Belmont shimmy, doing whatever a vampire hunter can, even moonwalking upstairs and breaking down walls for that juicy wall chicken. The fact that you have ample room to do all of this is a sign of great level design. It even lets you practice dealing with two of the biggest annoyances in the series, rotating platforms and Medusa heads, clearly marking the former and showing you how your new toys can help you with the latter. This is some smart gaming back from when Konami knew what they were doing with themselves instead of selling themselves out with pachinko.
Man, those guys are so screwed if the bubble bursts. In which case, I will laugh my ass off.
We live in an age where there exists small teams with enough talent and dedication to make a game with more polish than AAA studios with tens or even hundreds of employees. In fact, aside from music, voice acting, and some of the story, Dean Dodrell was able to make Dust and Elysian Tale almost completely on his own. The game tells a story that tackles topics like racism and finding one's place in the world. And giving you a great level to introduce you to this world doesn't hurt either. After a brief interactive cutscene in which you slash a bunch of soldiers like a heartless bastard, you're awakened in a beautiful glade by a talking sword that's being chased by an adorable Nimbat. Oh, and you've got amnesia too. How's that for mood whiplash? The level itself does a good job of getting you into the world and its rules. Basic stuff is conveyed through non-intrusive messages, which seem to be more and more prevalent as instruction booklets have been going the way of the Ford Pinto as of late, while the more interesting stuff is given to you through conversations between Dust, Fidget, and the Blade of Ara. These conversations also give you a sense of these characters' personalities, in particular how crazy adorable Fidget is and why she must be protected at any cost. She also shows that she can be really helpful. The level itself is straightforward, as to be expected for a first level, but since this is a Metroidvania, there's plenty of hidden stuff too. Add in the beautiful hand-drawn visuals complete with forest animals for flavor, and a majestic music piece, and there's a lot to love about this opening act.
Seriously, you have every opportunity to play this game now. It's pretty much on every modern console nowadays.
So, how did you spend your Christmas? I spent mine hanging with my dad, even saw Spider-Verse. Time well spent if I do say so myself. As for everyone's favorite Umbra witch, she tends to spend her Christmas beating the crap out of angels in the most scandalous and ridiculous ways imaginable. Never a dull moment, eh? The prologue of Bayonetta 2, aptly titled World of Chaos, takes any notion of subtlety and throws it out the freaking window. Not like subtlety is part of Platinum's MO, but all the same, this is freaking nuts. After learning the basics of combat, you are immediately thrown headfirst into a fight with renegade angels on top of a jet fighter that is in flight, while a jazz remix of Moon River plays in the background. And that's how the level starts. After a much appreciated present from Santa Rodon, delivered in a beautiful fashion after he drives a car along the wall of a building.
Remember, this is Bayonetta. Logic is not welcome here.
We get even more angel bashing with the introduction of the Umbran climax. And after a bigger angel slices apart your ride, you learn that QuickTime events are a bit more lenient than the original, and you have a boss fight on top of a moving train while the orchestral dynamite that accompanies the series' bosses punctuates the encounter. Later, another angel decides to tear up the bridge, but hey, looks like Jean finished up her shopping. The two witches continue the fight on the flying debris, capped off with the ever-loving climax, ending the fight in...
Cereza!
That's not good. With Jean being dragged to hell and Gamora playing King Kong on the skyscraper, the stakes have definitely been upped. These visuals defy any sanity, the music is great, and everything feels like it's been cranked up another level. Have I mentioned how crazy this is yet? Merry Christmas, everyone! Previously, on Portal, our mute protagonist Shell tossed the cores of GLaDOS into an incinerator and blew up the rogue computer before the enrichment center could be flooded with a deadly neurotoxin. And somehow, when she wakes up, she's in some sort of dorm room. And she's been in a cycle of revival and stasis for how long now? And it went on until things started going wrong. Good thing we have this dim-witted core named Wheatley to get us out of— Hey, take it easy there, Chief! Boy, this place has certainly seen better days. The Courtesy Call is one of those levels that goes all in on the atmosphere. All around you, the enrichment center is falling apart, and it's kinda surprising that the whole place hasn't collapsed by now. Everything is dimly lit with crumbling stone, mildew, nature reclaiming the area, dirty toxic water, and the occasional ominous drawings by Ratman. The music is also appropriately moody, underscoring the disrepair of the facility, with the occasional appearance of Wheatley and the straight-faced humor of the guidance messages to lighten the mood a bit. The level itself is well laid out, giving you the chance to learn about the portal gun and how it works in case you forgot, and the early testing chambers let you get the hang of the physics. But the defining moment of the stage is when Wheatley opens up a secret door and helps your attempt to escape this rotting dump, only to be the one who reactivates you-know-who. See? She told you she was still alive. The cold words of GLaDOS are the capstone of this combination of atmosphere and gameplay, and prove as an excellent setup for the rest of the game. Science never rests, and it certainly isn't going to let you rest anytime soon. I still stand by my old statement that Shovel Knight is the king of Kickstarter. A love letter to the NES days, this indie darling nailed pretty much everything that a modern retro game needs to be great. Usually fair challenge, top-shelf level design, gorgeous pixel graphics, a chiptune soundtrack that freaking slaps, the whole works. And you get all of this in the first level of the game. Plains of Passage continues the tradition of the older levels in this list, starting with the fact that there's no tutorials, meaning again you learn by doing. See that pile of dirt? You can dig up treasure from it. See those bugs? You can smack them. See those bubbles? You can bounce on them like a pogo stick. See that serving tray? Why it's here I don't know, but there's chicken there. See that dragon? You can go Scrooge McDuck on its ass. See that out-of-place block? It leads to a hidden passage. See that Black Knight over there? He's more serious than the one from Monty Python, and he's also the boss of this level. It's all there. And it's presented in a way that the player is introduced to each element gradually and with as little obstruction as needed. What's more, the stage is complemented in its aesthetic. The characters and environments are so detailed, and this is 8-bit style sprites. Not to mention that Strike the Earth is one of the best opening level themes in a long time. Best part? There's 3 different versions. The original, the version where you can learn how to boom with Plague Knight, and then there's the darker version in Spectre Knight's campaign, which is so goddamn edgy. All 3 of these versions work equally well, and there's still King Knight's campaign on the way. Maybe after that's finished, the boys at Yacht Club Games can start working on something else. Wouldn't want to be a one-hit wonder, am I right? Superhero games have a mixed reputation, but one thing that happens in general with these is that they start with smaller time villains and leave the big ones for the climax at the end. Thing is, SpiderMan has such a rogues gallery that they could fill an entire game with just big time villains. And with how much Sony was hyping Insomniac's take on the web slinger, you can tell they wanted to go big, and I can think of a surefire way to do that. Seriously, how many games can you think of where your first order of business is taking down the freaking Kingpin? You can tell this is going to be a fun ride just from how you make your way to Fisk's Tower, as you get a sense of how fast your web swinging is, and just how liberating it is to zip across buildings like a Tarzan of New York. And that's before you even reach the first wave of thugs, let alone actually reach Fisk Tower. The entire time you make your approach, the game weaves its tutorials cleanly into the action, giving you minimally intrusive prompts about your abilities as they come, from combat, to wall crawling, to stealth takedowns and more. All around you, the action is reaching a fevered pitch as Big Willie throws waves of goons after you in an effort to squash you. The music that plays during the whole ordeal really makes you feel like you're playing a game in the MCU. And all the while, you're treated to Spidey's trademark wit. Yuri Lowenthal does an excellent job of portraying the hero, not gonna lie. It also helps that Willie is no slouch as a first boss either. He hits hard, blocks your melee attacks if not stunned or webbed up first, and puts up the kind of fight you'd expect from one of Marvel's most intimidating villains. Granted, there's the matter of the goons and the quick-time events, but hey, not every suit can stay clean throughout a fight, right?
Now how about we see if Insomniac can do more Marvel heroes? I mean, Avengers Tower is a landmark in the game.
I honestly could write an entire TED Talk on why you don't need to reuse a level just because it's iconic. Okay, I understand that Green Hill Zone was a great level from the original Sonic, but Sega has fallen back on this level to open up the last few Sonic games in aesthetic if not outright. Come on, don't try to tell me that Windy Hill from Lost World is not basically just Green Hill. And you wanna know what the funny thing is? The best version was made by passionate fans that Sega commissioned. Sonic Mania was a celebration of classic Sonic, and it may seem like nostalgia pandering, it probably is, but of course Kristen Whitehead and the rest of the group would start things off with their rendition of Green Hill. So imagine Act 1 faithfully recreated and then enhanced with the bells and whistles that later games would add, including the shields, the now iconic spin dash, and of course the new special stages. Oh, and throw in parts of Emerald Hill from Sonic 2, Palm Tree Panic from CD, a mix of the iconic theme, and a mini-boss for good measure. Then transition to an all-new Act 2 with obstacles and gimmicks like zip lines and spiked logs and suddenly Death Egg Robot! One thing I appreciate about this zone is how it takes advantage of classic Sonic level design. The best levels in the old games just felt really open, with no single correct path to the goal, and reaching new paths was a show of skill. This version of Green Hill followed that game plan and expanded on it to make a level that really felt like a tribute to Sonic's early days on the Genesis. Not to mention how well it nailed the aesthetic of Green Hill's past and expanded on that as well, especially with more vertical backgrounds to add more variety to the look. It was clear that these fans had one goal to honor the history of Sonic, and they hit the ground running.
Makes me wonder what those guys are up to, considering Sonic Team themselves are a mess nowadays.
Now before we move on, here are a few honorable mentions that just missed the cut. Joe the Hero from Beautiful Joe, Autumn Hills from The Messenger, a GNC from God of War, First Sumeragi from Azure Striker Gunvolt, and Sector 1 Reactor from Final Fantasy VII. A lot has changed for me since 2012. I've developed as a content creator, met a bunch of awesome friends who have kept me sane even in the worst of times, and gone through a couple of console generations to boot. One thing, however, hasn't changed one bit. Great opening levels teach you the stuff you need to know in a non-intrusive way and set up the theming of the game. And there's one level that almost always comes up in the discussion regarding these standards. What I'm getting at is that Central Highway from Megaman X is still what I see as the best way to open up a game, and that is a figurative hill I am literally willing to figuratively die on. First off, can we start by saying how big this was for a Mega Man game at the time? We'd already gone through 6 Mega Man games on the NES by this point, and each time we'd started from picking a Robot Master to shoot lemons at. Here, we were just dropped into a highway in the middle of a robot revolt, accompanied by a rockin'-ass soundtrack and the awesome sprite work that the series would become known for. But even for people who were new to Mega Man, this was a perfect example of how an opening level could benefit from the relative simplicity of the game's controls. You only had so many buttons to work with, so it wouldn't take you long to get the hang of what you could do. And the level is simple enough that once again you can learn by doing. Especially in the case of that giant bee which falls through the highway, and then boom, you can learn how to wall jump. Not to mention how the level ends with Vile in his huge-ass ride armor that doesn't even have a health bar. You don't need a cutscene because you're experiencing this fight that you can't win. You get to feel that helplessness firsthand as you get beaten to within an inch of your life until Zero's glorious arrival, followed by his message of X's infinite potential. That moment sets up the whole theme of the game. Getting the weapons, gaining the power-ups, and eventually getting strong enough to take down both Vile and Sigma. All of that following the theme set up by this first level. This is how you open up a game. No need for pop-ups that interrupt you, no need for these diagrams that remind you what does what, just a level that sets you and the game up for success. You can learn a lot from history.
I'm the Quarter Guy, and ever since the producer of Mega Man 11 hinted that he's preparing for the next game, speculation's been in the air that it might be the next X game. In which case, I'd be hyped as hell, because let's face it, Axel's been in that coma for way too long.